Here we go.
There we go.
See it now. All right, great. Okay, that's what we needed. All right, I'm gonna get myself situated here. All right. Yeah, so really what we're going to cover right now in this session, and I really want you to think about the possibilities because I'm going to go ahead and preview and do a little bit of a demo, but I want to go in through these and start the discussion because you have resources to be able to get available, and we will, of course, make sure that you have those through AESA and other partnerships to follow the discussion. But for right now, I want to really dive in and look about how these tools from Microsoft 365 are supporting the learning environments as we transition from more of a hybrid to blended learning models in schools. And like I said, we're going to talk a lot today about what that would look like from the environment in setting and redesigning learning spaces to engage student thinking, to support student instruction and engagement, especially with interventions and reaching in those students. I know because of COVID and what's happened over the last year in education, lots of schools are really struggling with ensuring and making sure that students have access to resources and interventions to cover for learning loss or any kind of skill loss that happened, just to help with those achievement gaps that we are seeing just from the inconsistency in some of the systems that we've had over the last year. And then also, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to use these tools to create a culture of outreach and support. So really what we want to look at is how we can support the environment during blended and hybrid learning models, also be able to use our instructional tools as part of our toolbox, and then of course, create those structures for learning. And then, of course, just because I always try to remind people when we're coming through these webinars, kind of where we're coming at when we're going through here is remembering that I know as educators and leaders, we use what we know. We're going to go back and use a lot of these strategies based on research and just best practices in the classroom to support teaching and learning, and understanding that we always embrace change. However, we have to be selective because we need to make sure that it fits into our learning community and meets the needs of our students. So sometimes we do have to be selective, but we always embrace change, and that we are all here to support students. That is why we do what we do in education, and I'm going to really reflect a lot back on in this presentation about the learner and how we're supporting the learner in their journey. And then again, it is that art of reflection, continuous improvement. Every time I've always gone through a lesson or have even through a PD session, a professional learning session, I've always thought about going back and reflecting on how I can improve my skill or how I can support and work with those that I'm trying to teach more about these tools. So I've always said Microsoft Office, think of it as your 365 instructional toolbox. We're going to look about right now about redesigning learning spaces and engaging student thinking beyond the walls of the classroom. So just talk about how do we get those learning spaces ready. So as we transition right now, we're coming to the end of the school year here in the Northern Hemisphere. In basically in the United States, we're starting to look at more of our breaks in schools that are coming up. And looking for next year how we may want to set up our spaces and transitioning into different instructional models. Microsoft Teams is still continue to be that hub of student learning and can support those learning experiences. Digital spaces of learning have really replaced that physical classroom in a lot of areas. We're no longer restricted to just the four walls of the classroom. We now have digital tools like Whiteboard that we can integrate. If you have access to Minecraft for Education is also another digital learning space that we're going to talk about. And even OneNote have become really flexible tools to help with that creative thinking and critical thinking areas, and that have helped open up those learning spaces. SharePoint sites have become a great way to share and highlight student information and work. And like I said, and I use this slide a lot in my presentations whenever I'm talking about Teams, just to remember that Microsoft Teams really is that hub because it offers the autonomy and flexibility that educators need for their programs, for their student needs, and really adding in different tools for interactive learning and engagement. I like to say called the verb of learning, the engagement of students where they can get hands-on and actually start in those learning systems. And then, of course, there is the sustainability of just Microsoft security and the pieces that they have, the file structure and the organization that is going to help preserve that history of that learning journey and that progression through learning these skills. And it always has to be relevant. It needs to fit in our workflow and what we do and how we work with students and what that looks like. So right now, just to give an idea here, let me go ahead and go another slide up and talk about just Teams. This is an example of Teams, but I'm going to jump in actually into my demo account in just a moment and show you exactly what this looks like in that Teams version here. But what I really want to make sure we can focus on here is looking and seeing that here's an example of the Teams. We've broken it down here. This is what we mean by creating these digital learning environments and digital learning spaces. You can see we've numbered the class, like the channels that are here in a team. When we're dealing with team, there are 3 basic areas we always want to remember. And it is the team itself that is going to hold all this information. A lot of times I will explain that almost like a file cabinet sitting in the corner of your classroom that's going to hold all this information for all of your students to access and members of your team. We have the channels that serve as each one of those type of drawers for people to be able to access information and keep that information there. You can see here by the icons here, these are actually private channels that are going to allow me as the educator or the instructor in the class to create private spaces, maybe to have some student group work, maybe to work with some students one-on-one, or even to add in maybe my instructional support or other types of other resources that maybe need to work with students in my classroom, but need more of a private, more secure space for the information and the data that's stored there. Even in the selection in the channels that we've created here, you can see we've put in those units of information that we're going to be using. We've used a number system because when Teams itself is used in creating these channels, it's going to be in an alphabetical order. That's just the default. However, if we add in the numbering system here, when we're numbering our channels, it's going to create more of a consistency for how we want to have the structure of our classroom and our settings. I know when I was a classroom teacher, I used to spend hours I went back to school setting up the environment of my classroom to help with the flow and how I wanted instruction and that support and learning to come through. So it's similar to how how you're structuring in your team's environment in here. And also, you can see in here in these digital learning spaces, there are pieces and parts to this class that we've also added to ensure that we are making connection and actually creating a culture within that learning environment. So I'm going to actually come here to my team. I want to check in and make sure you still can see my screen and should just be seeing my screen here with my teams. Awesome, great, thanks, Jernon. So in my teams here, that actual team that you just saw in that slide was this team. This is more of a secondary team. You can see here that, again, it's more of a unit based. However, if we do have some more of the younger students or more elementary, same type of structure. However, we've added in a few emojis. If you are working off of a Windows-based keyboard, you can always edit and add in these visual additions into when you're naming your channels by coming in. I'm actually going to select the channel that I'm working in. I can hit my three ellipses. I can hit edit this channel. This is going to be, of course, the title of the channel name that I have, but then if I can then add in by selecting the Windows key and the period sign, a sentence period sign. At the same time, I'm going to get that emoji box, and I am able to add in those visual cues, which also helps with our students. And it does not have to be for just our primary students. This is a great resource. Adding these visuals in helps a lot with students that may need more assistance all the way through to higher educational spaces or more secondary areas, because it also supports those students where English might be their second language, and just being able to add in and support that information. So I wanted to point out where each one of these areas and channels can then become this digital learning environment or digital learning space that can really help out in more of a blended area. And when we talk about hybrid and blended, I want to kind of explain what I mean by those models right now. We've kind of taken on these terms across globally across education to more represent the experiences that we're seeing and working with our students. Although the terms like hybrid education and blended learning have been really around for years, there really were a way for us as educators to explain what we are experiencing as we were transitioning between remote learning and coming more to face-to-face learning. So when we think of hybrid, just for understanding where we are in relation to the models and the work that I'm going to show you today, is those areas where students may be in a situation where they may be at home for part of the week while half of their classmates are in class on particular days, and then they transition or switch at some point between the week at time to come back and, into school. So that actually helps with social distancing. So myself as a teacher, I may have a student, a class size of 30 students, but I'm only seeing 15 of those students at a time, or a portion of those students at a time, while the other students then are maybe learning at home or attending class meetings. I've even worked with educators this year who have 3 different models working in their classroom at one time. They have a third of their class, which is fully remote and at home at one time. Another that is actually in this more hybrid, so they're at home joining class meetings and doing independent work. And then the in-class students that are in class with them during the day. And then, of course, those students that are transitioning in and out then switch back and forth. However, that remote student only option, those students stay remote all, the entire time, all week long. A lot of times I've been asked about when they're actually creating these hybrid models, what's a good model for deciding those transition days. I've always said, depending on your learning community, and really taking in what's best for your families, your students, your staff. But an ideal situation would be able to have those more remote learning Wednesdays for everyone, where it gives yourself a chance to be able to switch between student bases as far as a school to go ahead and sanitize, get clean, have students come in, a new set of students that come in at the end of the week. But as an educator, and it also gives time for teachers to reflect on what's been happening in the classroom in that learning environment to be able to adjust and change instruction for the second half. So with those kind of models in mind, and then incorporating more blended learning strategies, which is part and like a component of that experience of hybrid, is where you are using digital tools like Teams and creating these digital learning environments to actually extend learning of opportunities beyond the classroom. So that means that you're going to try and find more independent work for students to be able to actually use skills and work on maybe projects and those kind of ideas at home for themselves to be able to do that. So in these digital learning spaces that we have right here, that's where I want to bring up where we have in here these situations where like our Minecraft classroom. is a perfect example. We've used these channels to actually create digital learning environments to go ahead in that blended learning model for students to go ahead and move in beyond those class times. Because in your environment, you want to be able to actually have a created environment where students feel like they have places to be included. You can see here we've got class meetings and homework support. We've even got highlights and celebrations that are here. And then we can even see that we've got places just in the classroom that includes the building in that community. And I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into these areas and activities in a little bit to talk about how we can support that more in the classroom. I'm going to stop for a second and see if there's any questions so far. All right, so I'm going to dive back in and go ahead and explain more about these areas. So I mentioned before SharePoint when I was going through in the PowerPoint and talked about SharePoint and including that as an area. I'm going to come up here to the general channel and just talk about that for a second. So Teams actually is a shell that brings together all of our applications and supports learning, and we often called the hub. I've called it the hub for student learning because it's where we can start and put all of these materials and create these spaces together. But if we look at the top here, of course, we talked about team itself, we talked about channels. The tabs across a channel, each channel, of course, has their tabs across. These are really where I think the magic happens when you're trying to create these digital spaces because they can be so fluid in what it is that you're trying to integrate. So across here, you can see these are just different tabs that I have that are part of this class. So the class notebook is the notebook area that essentially comes with the team and the team structure because this is a class team. Assignments is also going to be another place where that's going to be the assignment feature that is going to be, again, part of this class structure team and the kind of teams it is. Same with the grades that you have in here. However, these other types of tabs that I have here are things that we have added or you can add as an educator to bring as a resource to actually create these digital spaces or access to information easily for your students. They are a great way to allow for that independence and then extend upon for those students that are maybe working at home, that are on your remote learning type things. There are great ways to bring in all different kinds of resources into your classroom. So how we do this is this Magic Plus. This is, like, of course, that's what I call it. It is the icon that allows you to add in a tab. It's this plus sign that comes in. And like I said, I've always referred to this as the Magic Plus because it's going to allow me and enable me to add in these different applications that might be tied here that I might be using. So really what has happened here in SharePoint, and I want to highlight this, is that SharePoint has now added in where you can add in your home pages that you have on SharePoint that are, of course, tied to this team. And I'll show what that looks like in the back end in just a moment. But you can also add in any SharePoint site. So if you have pages that are built out, if you're a school leader or a district administrator, a central office administrator, or if you are a service agency that is supporting and you've built out a SharePoint page or that and something that people have access to, you can actually share that because it becomes that place where they can actually reach and get those resources. Now, the only issue where you can run into where you can run into some areas, to be full transparent, is making sure that you're in that same tenant issue. But if you are a service agency that is really operating as the tenant or supporting schools within your tenant and have access to that, then you're able to set up these SharePoint pages. Now, if you're supporting maybe the structures of those schools and you're a service agency supporting the structures or support of the schools or districts that are out that are seeking services from your agency, consistency, then you are able to then show them and teach them how to use these resources in this way to expand this out. So what I'm going to do here just to show what this looks like, these icons over here on this far right, of course, are my icons to be able to start a tab conversation. I can extend this out, but I'm going to go over to this globe because that globe is the one that actually is going to bring us out from Teams. I'm, of course, on Microsoft Teams online version because it's my demo account, but I'm going to go ahead and push that and go out to the website because I just want to show you what I mean by SharePoint. So here is our SharePoint page that we just were in our and I just showed you what that looked like in Teams. Teams actually sits on its own individual SharePoint site. So when you go ahead and collect or come into the SharePoint and find what team or area that you're in, you're going to see these SharePoint sites that are created here. Like I said, this is just an hour webinar, so I can't dive completely right into how to break down SharePoint. However, there is going to be resources and information here included in these materials and resources, and I'm always here to help you find resources to learn more about SharePoint. But I can tell you SharePoint is a game changer for helping and setting up and creating these digital environments and learning spaces for your students in more of a blended and hybrid learning experience. And the reason for that is because I can actually create different pages over here that's going to support the work that we're doing. So for example, I'm going to come here and come to this Minecraft classroom. This is an actual channel in our team that we've added in here, but on the back end in SharePoint, you can see what this looks like. So this is really an explanation of maybe what you're using these Minecraft education worlds, and then you can actually download here and have access to download the world and get into those access areas. Now, if you may not be a school or an area where that uses Minecraft Education Edition entirely yet, maybe it's something you guys are still exploring, just know this is just a mere example of how you can create that digital space. So for example, this could be a resource that comes from your current textbook experience that you have with your English language arts program. It could be a content area that you have with maybe one of your science programs or your social studies history programs. So it's again another way to create one of those digital learning spaces in each one of these areas. Then you can also edit in these pages so that you're actually controlling and really supervising and regulating what is available to the students that you have there. But it's a way for you to create these spaces that fit right into Teams. So when you hit that magic plus here, I'm going to go back that I kind of showed before, and I hit on SharePoint in here. When I said I want to add any page or a SharePoint site here, that's where you can go ahead and get that URL link to that SharePoint page we were just on. It's asking about content from the actual SharePoint that I have. So for example, I could add this Minecraft page here, see what it does. I'm signed in. There we go. And now I've got that page that's right in my team. So it's really accessible for your students. These again can be changeable. I can now even rename this like to my messages to my students. I could say start here if I wanted to. So if you had data or any type of notebook, like pages that you wanted to go here, you can of course add these tabs, edit these tabs. I can then remove this tab. But these tabs become fluid for you able to use these types of tools throughout the day that are here and how you're using those SharePoint pages. Cool. I'm going to stop for a second, see if we have any questions there. I go back to my PowerPoint. All right, we just covered a lot there. Okay, so Again, these in here, and I will of course pass on this resource so that you have this resource along with this video webinar that's filmed. But in these resources, I just went ahead and kind of highlighted and talked about how you can add in these different resources. So we just talked about tabs and how you can use that. Now, this is a great way again to use tabs and adding in like agenda slides and using PowerPoint to create again those digital learning spaces that you're trying to connect with your students, even in blended learning, in that communication. So these are going to be strategies that you can continue to use and to utilize that are going to add in efficiency. They're going to add in productivity. They're going to add in even those skills and bringing that on with your students as you move forward, even as more face-to-face learning happens into instruction and in classrooms. Remembering to use these tools in this way to get a lot of these types of tasks out of the way. Agenda slides created such as this in PowerPoint are a great way to go ahead and have assignments for the week listed, help to keep students organized, and then also talks about those more metacognitive skills that we talk about, which is that learning, how students learn, thinking about learning, because then you can bring in those things about goals and talk about daily goals, weekly goals, monthly goals. Those guys a way to track. And then you can even assign those and those types of skills and working on even using Teams assignments and assigning in there. And so students are really thinking about what their goals look like, maybe even projects and how they're moving on and what that looks like in our classrooms. So we talked about our environment and setting up those digital learning environments and what that can look like. And then now, and we also even talked about instruction and engagement and a little bit about strategies of bringing in, like using, of course, the structure of our tabs to create those fluid environments during instruction during the day, because those tabs can change from day to day. They can change from week to week. They're a great way, again, whether any instructional model you are in, to keep students on keys and on pace of what it is that you're working on. Now we're gonna go ahead and look at even some more of these tools and how we can integrate those into support as more of those tools, those instructional toolbox for learning. We talked about Minecraft. I had to go ahead and put that back in here and just give you some more information about that. Minecraft, it is a great way to bring in abstract ideas and make them concrete for students. A lot of times the conversation comes around where we see that we are really working on our skills with reading and writing and math and trying to figure out how to bring in Minecraft as thinking of it where it was, and it's kind of where it started in that more gamified, more of a educational gaming area. We now are seeing what it and how this application can really impact instructional strategies and curriculum just happening in the classroom. So a perfect example is a math lesson. I know I used to have to try and struggle about teaching things about taking data and surveys and understanding what that looked like when we were taking or collecting any kind of data and having to organize it in structures. Students can use Minecraft to come in and build out these visual displays of the data that they've gathered and looking at that in relation and be able to start having more of those higher level conversations as a transition into more abstract, more graphic designs or things that you're trying to teach. Supports math, science, and areas. There's even now a League of Literacy actual world that we can share too that is really based on bringing in reading strategies within a Minecraft world. So it's creating those digital learning spaces like I talked about earlier to bring in questions where we can talk about abstract ideas like when we're talking about reading elements or narrative elements like tone or foreshadowing or inference or any of those more abstract ideas of theme that really take time in understanding and conversation and are really hard for students to really comprehend meaning because they are so abstract in their meaning. They have to be able to comprehend the text that they're reading and then make in their cues and understanding what that looks like. Minecraft can be an area in tools like League of Literacy to bring in more of those concrete ideas in that too. Of course, Flipgrid. A lot of educators around the world have just really embraced and found how Flipgrid empowers every voice, as it says here. Flipgrid is part of the Microsoft Tools family, and it fits nicely into Teams. And I'm going to go ahead and go back to my demo classroom that I have here, and come down into more of our class meetings and homework support, where I've even brought in myself and kind of demoed early in this classroom. Oops, I'm having trouble with my mouse here. Where I've come in and even brought in, setting up meetings and what this looked like. And you can see here, I know this is a little Flipgrid area, know that this is here. It's actually my Flipgrid that showed and just was a demo for students to welcome them and how to use this tool and how to find class meetings and homework support. But again, I can come back to this Magic Plus. I'm in here in my channel and I can add in an app and I can see here where I can really connect right into Flipgrid and bring that into my team. There's even a space in Flipgrid where I can go directly from the Flipgrid that I recorded and put it right into the team that I am using. So even when I come back into Flipgrid and have my Flipgrid, I can go ahead and integrate it right into my team and sign in with my Microsoft login. And it can be moderated space for myself as the educator and be able to use this tool. But let's talk about Flipgrid as the tool, as instruction, and what we're talking about between blended and hybrid learning. So again, we need to have an even balance between our synchronous and asynchronous, which means those learning activities where we are with our students and are face-to-face with our students, but then those learning opportunities that are still impactful, still are meaningful, and still provide the student-centric experience that we want, that are in those types where students can be on their own to reflect and learn about their learning, and to provide some assessment opportunities for you as the instructor or those that you're supporting. When we need to transfer materials, information, knowledge, ourselves as the instructor, as the educator, we have our information we need to share. We may have direct instruction, but the end of the day, the goal is that we need to have learning objectives and learning targets where students have taken the transfer of that knowledge, of that information, and they have made it their own. There has to be that tie to their learning, and they can put the skills and the knowledge they've learned in application. Flipgrid is a great resource to get students to be able to record themselves, and you can build a culture of safety where you don't share these videos. They can be an assessment piece for yourself, especially for those students that are struggling, but they can record themselves actually going through their thought process of even a math problem. I've seen this used in reciting before students need to write, as a pre-write activity, as a check-in, a quick check-in to make sure that they're on, if there's any misconceptions and maybe some of the information they learned. But it's a safe way, again, for students to process what needs to happen, because when students go through that more verbal process to be able to transfer application, it allows them to be able to get those thought processes into actually have to use that tool or actually have to take that skill and make it their own. Now, again, you may have students that are more on the nonverbal side. I mean, to be honest, my own daughter struggles and she has struggled with her own areas of select mutism, but Flipgrid has helped her. I can tell you it's a tool that's helped her even process and try and get more of that communication out and be in a practicing place to be able to speak and really talk through these experiences. Because it can be be moderated and you do not have to share those videos. It becomes a safe place if you can get, have students understand and build that culture. Now, it also can be a place where if it's okay and depending on your class, and teachers and instructors know their class, they know their students, and really can, understand what the culture and the climate of that class or that course is. It's a time where you can share the videos and have a time for students to share thinking, which means that you would maybe highlight a few videos a week and let students know and get them comfortable there. But then it's a way to share student thinking as they go through these different processes. And it's just, again, reinforces not only content areas, so the students are learning the skills and knowledge that they need to work through, but it also is reinforcing those more metacognitive or thinking about thinking strategies about learning. So they are actually going through the processes and what they're using. So I know Flipgrid is a powerful, great tool, but that's just another way to even share with instructors that are using this to make sure they might even be using it, extending how they're using it. Because again, the resources that are there are available on Flipgrid. Why I always say why it matters is because you do have this great resource of collaboration to other educators to be able to find and ask questions. You can create, of course, different resources with just being able to send out videos to explain things to people so they understand it, for even to explain it more even to your parents, your community members, your students themselves, have them share. And then you can find ideas on there and integrate there into some great lessons that build around Flipgrid. But then just even as those assessment checks, that's kind of what I wanted to share and make sure I was hitting, really hitting and covering and making those connections in this presentation, is using those just for those formative assessment pieces, especially when you have students in different instructional models and you have students in more of a blended learning. And even if you're face-to-face and you might be using these tools more in a center base if you have rotation models. Now, I'll say rotation model, and a lot of times older teachers of older students, more secondary, kind of say, no, that sounds like more of a primary kind of strategy, but really it works very well in secondary because it gives yourself that time as the instructor to really check in with those students that might be struggling with content while you're still letting some of your other students take a deeper dive or get more of a depth, like a breadth of that knowledge that you've been sharing all week long. So just thinking about using these tools in that way.
Hey, Jerry, there's a couple questions in the chat.
Great.
Perfect timing.
Yes, because I was going to stop and say that. All right, questions. Is there a data limit of videos per course? Are we talking about all right, some great questions. Okay, so in the chat, so I want to read these questions out loud, so because for the recording. So I've got here that we are asking about book studies over the summer for teachers, and would teachers in the book study need to have account if you're using these formats? They should still be able to use, they should still be able to, as a guest, come in and use these formats, be able to use these tools if you add them in and let them as that class be able to use these tools. So when you're in Flipgrid now, especially with Flipgrid, now that you're using, they have more of their closed kind of series as far as allowing students in. They're trying to be very protective about keeping these boards safe for personal information and identifiable information. The best way, if you're going to be doing a book study over a large number like of different maybe guests in areas that you're doing this and not in the same tenant, you can set up in Flipgrid. Let me go ahead and go in here and I'll show you what I mean. Let's actually just come into Flipgrid and I'll show you what I mean. You can actually go into Flipgrid, and when you're setting up your board, you can create a password for that board. So I'm just going to come into our Show Me EDU. Okay, they have accounts. Okay, so do you feel comfortable coming off mute? And does that, I just want to make sure I answer your question.
Sure. So I'm sorry, I had posted two questions at separate points in the presentation.
Okay.
So I guess my most important question is, I would love to use this format for book studies for teachers across our county this summer. But I cannot guarantee that every teacher that signs up for the book study has a Microsoft 365 account. So I just wanted to know, like, before I start to build the book study, that they would be able to come in and access it and still, you know, look at the content, engage in the discussions and that stuff.
So what will happen is they will end up, because you can sign up as long as you have Teams and you have structure. In my experience, they are eventually going to have to get into their own Microsoft account, but they can use their email, come in, and they're able to get their own version of Microsoft that'll allow them to come in and use your team. So you should still be able to set up like a book study. So for example, this is an actual example of a book study I did across the state that I live in when I used to do in my previous role. And, you know, I would have chapter area focuses here, and I would have educators from all over that did have different access and did not have 365 accounts currently. However, they would have to come in and be able to create their own accounts and then just to have access to those resources. But you should be able to sign them in as a guest and come in, and they should be able to access. Now that what I mean is they should be able to access it online. It will ask them to sign in and come through. And if they want to be able to download these resources and that, they're going to be really relying off of what you've signed them into as access. So it's going to be like a free account, but they're not going to have anything that you have as far as tools with more of a licensed account. If that makes sense. Yes. And then also what I've set up also too, and I don't know if you have this situation, but I purposely did this to also what was easier for me in the long run. And I don't know if you have access to this. I actually worked with my IT administrator through our teams and created up more generic student accounts for my summer training and book study courses, just for those who were having such difficulty, and really made them more instead of personalized accounts, but more generic accounts to be able to get in, and actually called them, I believe it was, we used to do more of, I did more of a MIE, like our Microsoft Innovative Educator training. So I would call them MIE Student 1, MIE Student 2, or MIE Train 1, you know, those type of things. And we had those more generic accounts. I could control them, or our IT administrator could control them easily. They could turn them off as far as not having them active or that. And they also could control the passwords there. So they were very control type accounts, but it made it easier for just those educators that were trying to join the book study, join the courses, and we're having struggling, but they should be able to still access this information. And if you, Susan, are going, as you're going through this and going through and setting these up, please feel free to reach out to me, and I can help you get more set up or go through this and find out some more information and resources as you go through building that. All right, great questions. Is there any other question here too beyond that? Data limit, there's a question, data limit or limit of videos per course. Is that pertains to even the videos that are available in Stream if I'm recording, or is that applied to more Flipgrid?
It's more Flipgrid. So for instance, if I were to do, I really like the way you use it for like check for understanding. Would, like, even say I have 30 students, would they be able to do one every single day? Or do you have a data limit and I would exceed that? You know, like I need to space it out.
I have not heard of any data limits in areas with Flipgrid. At all. I will make sure Renan or Sam or anyone else on this call know. I have not experienced or heard of in any of my experiences any kind of data limits with Flipgrid, and I know people that use that in that capacity.
I concur, Jerry, but I'll double check.
When you do set up, so it's a great question. The question was, if I wanted to do these check-ins and how to use that, really was definitely a great use and had put that together. That's where you may want to look about how you're setting it up and making sure when you go through with your Flipgrid, whether how you're using it as a discussion group or a topic, and that might help also save how you organize those together. When you come to, I'm going to come back to the PowerPoint. When you come into Flipgrid itself, they have a help center that is amazing that will walk in and kind of explain that area. The Microsoft Educator Center also has a great resources there to help with getting set up in Flipgrid and those uses and that explanation. So great questions. All right, I'm going to kind of continue on as we go through here. We've talked about Flipgrid and tools. Of course, the data and digital spaces, if you're going to be using, this is why using the analytics in these classroom, our classroom teams are a really amazing way to gauge just what's happening in conversation. So now that's where it can get difficult, because if you imagine being in a place where you are, let me go back to my classroom. I'm going to use my secondary class here. So if I have here in a space, and I even am in face-to-face learning now, and I've got them even more of my maybe blended learning that's coming in, maybe I am still in that hybrid model. Any way we kind of describe these instructional models, really what we are talking about is how do I gauge the conversation that's happening maybe with my students that are face-to-face, and then also keeping our discussions ongoing while they're in these digital, more learning environments or digital spaces. A great way to do that, of course, is to have these conversations and to ask, those leading questions to get students to have these maybe even group discussions in these group channels here about the work that they're doing. And as an educator now, we ask back always, if I'm going to have these activities and get the best and most out of them, I have to be able to have a way to track or understand how my students are engaging, understand how my students might be, moving back and forth into those spaces. In that, of course, always comes back to that Magic Plus. You want to make sure you have an app that it comes in a Microsoft Classroom team. You have the option to add in what's called Insights. And Insights is the area that is going to give you some really great analytic feedback for you as the educator. Again, so this is what is going to allow you to get an idea in your students. Now, I'm going to put in this Insights, and it's going to tell me you don't have enough data for this information. I know already what's going to come up because this is my demo class. So I'm going to go back to my slide, but I wanted to show you how it becomes a tab in the class. I knew that was going to happen here. But it is a tab here in the classroom that you can add to. It's only a tab that will add to a classroom team. So it has to be the classroom team. And it only is going to show up for me as the educator or the owner of the team, right? It's not going to show up for students. But I am going to go back to my slide because now I have a slide that shows the kind of information that's in here. You can see who's been inactive. You can see how many new communications have happened. There's information about habits, meetings. It's going to give you about information about your assignments. It's also going to give you just student analytics here that you can search through here and be able to use. Again, this resource I'm going to send out with this webinar, and you'll have a link here that talks about Insights and how it works in teams. But this is where really insightful and really helpful to when you have these spaces where students are in these digital learning spaces, and then they are also in the classroom. This is what's going to help educators in the middle try and tie these areas together. I now can kind of gauge what I'm happening, because I know when I used to have classroom discussions in the class, I was able to I either was recording either on a clipboard somewhere, I was recording what was happening and who was speaking, and I could gauge about that and try and listen for those misconceptions and what was happening, during our guided practice to make sure students were understanding the content. Same can happen now in this digital space, so that you're actually adding in time, more productivity areas. And then you can have conversations with students for follow-up, because what's even better about my old techniques of my clipboard method, if I could use more of these type of student discussions or here that are happening in my classes, I can then have resource links to maybe even support students. I can add in those applications to like Flipgrid that I showed. I can create a SharePoint page with more of the resources that might build off the discussion that's happening. I was working with educators in Australia, which were using this in a science class, and students were actually performing labs and sharing their lab work and being able to take pictures of each stage, have discussions about it, and then open up there. And really, and the instructor, the teacher that was there could follow the conversations using this insights and being able to track in the posts and the information and what's happening. So you can even come back and use insights at a student level so that you can see student by student, and then as an aggregate area where you can see students overall and how they're interacting and engaging with the different applications. So it's a really powerful way, again, to support instruction that's happening within the teams. And then I also have some information here about Power Automate. So if you are a Microsoft 365 license user and you have licenses for Microsoft 365, there is an application that's in your tools that is called Power Automate. And really what this is it is a no-code application way to add simple, what we call workflows to automated processes. So you can actually build an automatic flow that happens. So when a response is submitted, something on the back end will happen automatically. So there is a flow that I know a teacher had where if a response was happened on a certain team channel, there would be some kind of a message triggered. You can even set up an instant flow to be able to, or a scheduled flow to post messages or to post announcements in a team at a certain time. So this is really an application and process that enables you to put some more automation features within your teams that you have. Something that I worked on internally with a few members of my team are actual educational templates that are coming out really soon. I put some information here from our blog. There's a link there in watching for these templates to come out. Some of the templates we put together are notifications about responses, so approvals for even processes for requests, like requests for PD sessions, requests for pretty much anything, can be anything from maintenance to actual services to even if you're responsible for maybe providing some support for approvals for maybe itemized requests for materials or supplies. But those are just an example of some of the processes we put through. But you can also use forms in instruction. Power Automate in instruction to help with those feedback situations. So this is an actual process explaining how this works and what I mean by that. Because Power Automate, which is an application, runs off of forms as a trigger, which will then create a response. You can create a quiz in forms. In forms, you can create a quiz, and you can actually have the setting in the Microsoft form showing the responses or answers or giving that automatic feedback to the student who's just taken this quiz. And when you do that, you're also able to put in different information into the areas where the feedback is here. So for example, if this was a math maybe assessment that I wanted to gauge all of my students to see how well they were doing. On their immediate response, when they're checking in on their assessment, they can see, well, I've got the correct answers here, and they might have answered where it's actually going to give them a response. It's not going to give them the right answer, but it's going to tell them by their response, please complete activity B. It's going to let them know that they chose the wrong answer, and then give them some information to go back and complete that activity. On the back end, there's going to be a data collected for the instructor that's going to have a list of, all of these results of where students are. So you know which module students are working on. It's going to record those responses and create a SharePoint list that I can track, which is a SharePoint list really is just similar to an Excel file. It could create an Excel file if that's what would work better for me as the educator, but it's a way for students to take an assessment, get feedback themselves, actually get the next step in that process to maybe work on that. Myself as an educator, I'm going to have that data. It's going to be there for me. I can see where my students are working on. Now I can go back and check in with them to see where they're at and to see how their learning's progressed, and then go ahead and give them another quiz. What that does in this is it actually creates more of a system for me, even an intervention. And this can work even in off of more of those areas or situations that are, again, asynchronous or synchronous, in bringing in those tools together. So I can have an area where I'm assessing skills and knowledge, using these forms. It then can be recorded and shared and evaluated. I can come back as the teacher, either when I have them face-to-face or leaving and checking in with them over Teams, and using Teams as that to see how they're working, using their OneNote notebook to check work, Engage, or even in Whiteboard, I can do that. But I can use some progress monitoring, go back, and then be able to report and use these tools. So it is a great way to be able to use these. Now, we're just about done to be wrapping up, and I've kind of covered a lot of our culture about, sharing about how and gone the way and talked about culture of support and outreach and that, and using these in here. Really thinking about when we're trying to set up in our instructional situation and setting up these kind of digital spaces. These are some learning strategies that just work at all levels. And I need to go back to let me see if I can go back here. Back in my space. These are just all the resources that I have here. Want that? Nope. Go back here. My PowerPoint. While I'm getting this set up. There we go. Okay, these are just some learning strategies that really help with and going through remembering like that I do, we do kind of space. That is where when you're setting up class structures or class meetings and you're having students meet with you from these different areas. So if you are still in a hybrid area where you have students face-to-face and students at home or in a remote learning area, you're not going to want to schedule more than 3 meetings a day and keep them really to, depending on the age group, no more than 30 to 40 minutes long, because that's just that engagement piece. You want to really go through and make sure that you're doing, I call them 10 and 2 mini lessons, where you are having maybe 10 minutes of that instruction, but every 2 minutes you're checking in to see how students are doing. Because you've got students in a different instructional models, you really need to think about more of those check-in times in that, because of the type of the meeting structure. I should be modeling better my 10 and 2 check-ins in this webinar, but I'm a little bit stretched for time. But every 10 minutes or so, like I said, 10 minutes of information and every 2 minutes really checking in. Using concept maps or learning charts where students can progress and see themselves where they're at, where they should be, where they're going is also going to help. Whiteboard, PowerPoint, any of those tools, OneNote, where you can actually collaborate and create these types of learning maps, are going to be great ways to add these instructional tools in here. In and out circles is also a way for you to connect. Anytime you can connect students who are in your face-to-face learning instruction with the students that are in their remote learning environments. So maybe a question that they both respond to in a posting area or activity, because you want to make sure that you've got a checkpoint to see how students are taking in and understanding information in your face-to-face model versus those that are going to be in that virtual model. So you want to have those constant checkpoints in understanding what that looks like. And then using forms and polls is a great way just to do a check. So I talked a little bit earlier about creating just these digital learning spaces within your class team that show that these are important in what we do as community in those social emotional areas. our highlights and celebrations. Here, you can have different programs, but even adult learners, I've always have my highlights and celebrations area, things that we want to bring out. You can create just anonymous polls, quick polls to check about how students are feeling, check in with just to gauge the class. It's easy in your actual posting where you start a conversation to integrate a forms poll. And as an instructor, you can choose to make them anonymous or not. It's going to let those that are having the poll there, but it's a great way to actually check in. And this, like I said, this document is full of resources and information. I'm just going to quickly go through and show what I am referring to. There are information about each one of these tools, why it matters, how you can use them, connections right to our Microsoft Educator Center and training support to find resources and understanding, especially here about even pulling in each one of our application and tools, and then our Microsoft Teams. So any questions? I'm going to come on and put my video back on. I'm here. I really am here. And so, again, I will send this resource on to you also with here, and it has all of our information in that too, just more resources in there. And of course, you guys all know how to get a hold of me. So please reach out if you have more questions, and hopefully this was informative and helpful as you're transitioning and adding more of these instructional tools to.
Oh, your webinars always are very informative. And I just want to let you know, Candace Height just signed on. I have a feeling maybe we got our time zones were off a little bit, but Candace, just so you know, I'm recording this webinar, and I will send you a copy of the recording, and along with Jerry's contact information. So if you have any questions, you can forward them to her. And I'll be sharing you're going to share your PowerPoint with me.
Yes.
And any other resources, and I'll forward it out to the group. So.
Yes, and everything I talked about today, and there I've provided links to further information, resources, all of that too. So everything that we talked about today, because when we do these short webinars, I know people go, well, I want to learn more. So I provided those resources, and that's there. And again, just reach out if anybody is struggling or needs to take a deeper dive.
Sounds good. Thank you. As always, it's great to have you here. You are a wealth of information. I don't know how you know all that, but I want to remind our attendees that we have another Microsoft webinar coming up May 24th. So please check our website for opportunities under professional development. Also, what else have we got going? Also, our website has, I post these videos from all of our webinars. So please take time to go through our library, and there's a lot of helpful information there. So thank you so much, Jerry. Appreciate your time, and Renan.
Thank you. Anytime.
All right.
Thanks for having us.
Yes. You are so welcome. Thank you.